Buying your first home already feels impossible, and Trump's 2025 budget might actually make it even more difficult unless you know how to navigate it.
It's been a fun year so far, Jeb, of trying to navigate all of this stuff. House this morning, by the time you listen to this, the Senate may have passed as well, but the House passed the big, beautiful budget bill. For us here in our space, there's a few things here that we're going to talk about today that are important. Some good, some bad. We've already seen over the last several weeks, as they've unveiled kind of what this budget is going to look like. Negative impact for interest rates, which is obviously bad for affordability. We're going to break that down. The improvement, or the good thing, especially if you're in higher cost states like we are here in California, is a big expansion of the caps on the state and local taxes. We're going to go through that, give you an example. Beyond that, there are some other things in there, but the details are not fully out, really. They just passed it, 8 hours ago. So we'll be able to see later on what is in there, but we have some cuts to HUD, including Section 8, which really doesn't impact people who are looking at buying homes, but budget cuts that could impact FHA and HUD at the margins. We have a proposal in there for a first-generation homebuyer grant to help additional homebuyers, but not a lot of details, and we don't know if that will make it all the way through. But we'll go through all of those details and break it down. But Jeb, the big ones, you tell me where you want to start, is the expansion of the state and local taxes, which is likely because we have bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans in high-cost states like New York, New Jersey, California, very strongly in favor of expanding it. But that's likely to make it intact. We can talk about that. We can talk about the impact on interest rates and why interest rates are looking at the U.S. budget and reacting.
Well, I think the mortgage rate impact is going to have a bigger, I guess, use the word again, impact on housing affordability. So we'll talk about it, but let's talk about the big one, right? The SALT deduction is something that can have an impact for those that own homes already and those that are potentially buying in higher states. And like you said, this is one of those things that, the budget's going to get modified to some degree. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure at some point in time, a budget's been passed and all parties have been in favor and just said, yes, let's get it through. But typically there's some give and take. And this is one of those things that has been on, in conversation for a little bit in raising it. And we heard some crazy numbers at the beginning of the year, and it's dialed back a little bit, but quite a bit higher from where it is. So let's actually talk about what the SALT tax is, Josh. I think it's important to kind of start there. Like, what is this tax? What is it now? And what does that change? How could that change actually impact housing and affordability to some degree?
So in 2017, during Trump's first term, he wanted to decrease tax rates. So anytime you have a proposal like that at the federal level, they need to look, and these things need to be revenue neutral, or at least they need to be able to tell a story that says it's going to be revenue neutral. So you're cutting taxes, and you have to say, well, where are we going to get some of this back? So you are allowed on your federal tax return to deduct state and local taxes. The two big ones are your state income tax. If you're in a state with income taxes, if you're in Texas or Florida, congratulations, you don't have to deal with that crap. But for those of us in California and other states, you can deduct at the federal level your state income taxes and your property taxes. So for someone, I mean, in this day and age, Jeb, the Visual Capitalist ran a chart the other day of the median income required to buy a home. In California, like $219,000. If you make household-wise $219,000 in California, it gets you up to almost a 40% combined tax bracket. I mean, you have a very high level, and then you've got the state is like 13% on the marginal level at the highest end. So it's not your effective rate, but on the high end. So when we look at that, not being able to deduct that makes a pretty big difference. So you have $200,000. If you're at a 13%, that's $26,000. And if that deduction was capped at 10, you're losing $16,000 of deduction. Again, let's say the effective rate on that is 30% federal and state. You're talking $4,000 or $5,000 less spendable money your household has. So when we factor in property taxes, now again, first-time buyers here in a lot of California are looking at $500,000, $700,000, $1 million for a purchase price. So say you're at $500,000, that's $6,000 or $7,000 more of property taxes. So most people who make enough money to buy a home are already above the $10,000 cap on the state and local taxes. So there's no benefit coming from buying a home and being able to deduct the property taxes. It used to be one of the fairly big benefits. Like we used to talk about, there are 4 factors that help homeowners make greater wealth over the long haul than renters. And for a while, ultra low interest rates took away the interest deduction. Because again, if you're buying a $500,000 house at 3% interest, it's $15,000 a year. And you had a larger standard deduction than that for a married couple. So really the homeownership with the SALT cap didn't add anything. So it's still not going back old school the way it was before 2017, where it was a really big benefit, even in these areas. But it's going to even the playing field. And this is one of the areas. The reason why it's been contentious is many people around the country and go, dude, you're making $200,000. You don't need a tax break. And the person in Southern California making $200,000 household income is like,
Says I absolutely need a tax.
We're struggling to be able to buy a home, to keep our head above water,
Sure.
to save, to send our kids to college. So, and that's largely due to the cost of housing. The whole purpose of our show, those people, it's not that their life is that much more expensive. There are things in California that are more expensive than other parts of the country, but housing is probably 80 to 90% of the increased cost of living for people in California and other high cost areas.
Yeah. So with that said, on the table at the moment is taking the SALT deduction from $10,000 upwards of $40,000. So if that happens, Josh, and it gets $40,000, or maybe it's reduced, but like you said, I mean, there's some bipartisan support for this, and so the likelihood of it going higher is real. So let's just say it passes as it is at the moment. Does this actually benefit first-time home buyers? Or is this a benefit for those high income earners, those in high tax states, those that already own property in, expensive price points?
I would say it comes down and is very location specific, right? Let's use that family here in California that mom and dad both make 100 grand. So they make $200,000. They can buy a $700,000 house. That's going to be $9,000 roughly of property taxes. And in their state taxes, that family is going to pay $15,000, $20,000. So now they got $25,000 of deduction that was capped at 10. So maybe $10,000 to $15,000 of additional deduction on the federal level. That's probably a $4,000 or $5,000 savings. If I told you or your family you can save $4,000 or $5,000 on your tax bill next year, and that's spendable money, put in your 401k or spend on your kids, put it in their college fund, that makes a difference. But let's go and use another example of a first-time buyer buying a $400,000 house in Florida. They don't have state income taxes. They do have a relatively high tax rate, but even at that, they were paying $6,000 or $7,000 of property taxes on that $400,000 home. Changes nothing for them. So it's going to come down to, are you in a state with a state income tax? Is it a high state income tax? How are the property taxes in your state? A lot of states have a 0.5%. You can buy a $400,000 house and pay $2,000 a year of taxes. And if you have a 4 or 5% federal or state tax rate, and you qualify with $150,000, the $10,000 wasn't capping you out. So when we hear this, who does it impact? People in high property tax, high state income tax. So that's why you keep hearing Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, California, parts of Washington is where, if you're there, it's going to make a nice difference for you. For most parts of the country, it's going to be a negligible benefit to no benefit.
Got it. So let's talk about the one that will benefit everyone, and that's mortgage rates. So over the last couple of weeks, we've seen mortgage rates continue to trend up, not in a huge way, but it's just been a slow grind. We said a couple of months ago that whether they move up or move down, it's probably this grind, this grind a little bit higher, grind a little bit lower. And to be completely honest, over the last couple of weeks, hasn't really been a lot of negative news. I mean, the stuff that's come out, inflation has kind of moved in favor of, we're not at 2%, but we're a hell of a lot closer than we were.
And moving in that direction,
and
continuing
in
month
that
after
direction
month
on an annualized basis. So looks good there. Employment numbers have missed a little bit. We're seeing some breaks, some cracks, but nothing's breaking, still stable, which you would think interest rates would just kind of continue to trend, but yet we've seen interest rates move higher. Part of it is this belief that tariffs are going to have an impact on inflation in the future. So we've been having that for the last couple of months, and that's kind of already built in. But now there's another thing being built in, and it's somewhat of this budget, Josh. So what does that impact look like on rates and the future of rates?
You at home may be saying, what are you talking about? Why are we talking about the federal budget and interest rates, how that impacts? Well, the budget, because the United States spends more money than it makes.
You get out of here.
The hope was lots of promises on the campaign trail that we're gonna get spending under control. We're gonna cut the deficit. And yet now we see the budget, the big beautiful bill comes across, and it's not cutting the deficit. If anything, it's expanding the deficit.
Well, Josh, last night in the live, you weren't there. I posted a chart that came across yesterday, and right now we're spending about $1 trillion a year in interest on our federal debt. And the expectation is that I think by 2035, so about 10 years from now, it's going to be $2.2 trillion because of interest rates, because of the amount that we're spending. So this isn't a problem. I mean, this isn't a problem that's going away. It's a bigger problem that's continuing to grow.
Yeah, because they continue to run a deficit. Like we're not talking about balancing the budget. And this is what, we can insert your pet project here. You, the listener at home, Josh, Jeb, whatever thing that the government spends money on that we think is a great and valuable thing. The one that I saw yesterday is the Trump administration rolled back a mortgage assistance program for veterans that was created last year. So prior to last year, we never had it. But if we take it away now, everyone's saying this is a catastrophe. This is the end of the world. We cannot survive without this. But this, again, is not going to be a shock to you guys. We spent more than we had as a country in 2023 and in 2024. And we continue to add little pet projects like this. Every one of them, if I ask you about them, if I ask you, Jeb, if I ask you, Jane, listener at home, is this a good thing? Should we help veterans stay in their homes and avoid foreclosure on their mortgage? You say yes. So almost every program that we look at, no one is saying this is a stupid program. Why would we ever do this? But you can't just keep going, is this a good thing? Is this a nice thing? Should we do this? When you run out of money, the government doesn't have the same constraint that you and I have. When we run out of money and we've used up all of our credit, there's no more buying. No matter how important or nice or good it would be, we don't have more money to spend. So this budget doesn't solve that. And going back to that, when you have deficit spending, how do you finance a deficit? You issue treasury bills, bonds, notes, and you pay interest on that. You're borrowing. That is the government's credit card. So what Jeb just said, that the interest on the national debt is going to double in the next 10 years. Well, why is that? You may say, well, rates went up 3 years ago. Well, the government issues everything from 30-day to 30-year loans that they borrow. So much of that has not rolled over. It won't roll over until this year and next year, and some of it not for 10 or 15 years, but the majority of it will finally roll over in the next couple of years and have to go from the ultra low COVID interest rates to the much higher current interest rates. So the government's going to have to borrow more. Interest rates are higher, and it really becomes a supply and demand thing. We talk about supply and demand in the housing market. When there is a greater supply of government debt that needs to be purchased and a finite amount of buyers will pay less for it, which causes interest rates to go up. And that's the simple answer there. This budget tells us there's going to be more government borrowing. There doesn't appear to be any more demand out there for government debt. And the fear is that will lead to higher interest rates. At risk of boring everyone and making Jeb roll his eyes, my favorite economist ever, Lacey Hunt, has run through the numbers. And there's long been this academic theory that government debt leads to higher interest rates. And what they've shown over time is the decreases in productivity. This is not a good thing, but they've shown that it doesn't lead to higher interest rates because of the decreases in productivity. So it makes everything harder. All of the problems that the government has gets harder to solve going forward. But it doesn't necessarily mean rates are higher. But we see this every time. Every time we have a budget impasse, every time we look like we're going to borrow more than we need to, we're promised to, interest rates bump. So at some point, there will be a crisis, a budget crisis where the world is convinced that the U.S. can't pay their debts. I don't feel like we're anywhere near that. We've seen this like 5 times over the last 15 years.
Well, the one solution, Josh, isn't it, if and when interest rates come down, can't we refinance some of our own debt at lower rates and potentially extend some of these terms so that, that instead of doubling in 10 years, it just delays the problem further. It doesn't solve the problem, just kicks the can a little bit further down the road, which is essentially what we've been doing forever. So it's not political. It's not any of that. It's just the reality that at the moment, what's happening is debt is growing, more bonds are being issued, which unfortunately is going to have an impact on rates. But we've been big believers. I think I can speak for you in that we, for the last couple of years, didn't believe that interest rates could stay as high as they were because of the government trying to service their own debt, right? And when you don't have enough money to pay your own bills, at some point you think, well, crap, how can we get this under control? Well, one of those is we take interest rates lower, makes it a little bit more affordable, so we're not spending quite as much money there. That's proven to not yet happen, what we believed was going to happen. So, but I still do believe that long term. What are your thoughts?
Well, Jeb, one of my favorite parts about doing this show is depending on the episode and depending on what one or both of us says, we get accused of being flaming left coast liberals or hardcore MAGA Trumpers. So I think it's like a Rorschach test for what you believe and what you hate, and you guys can project that. A small subset of the
actually let us know in the comments which you think we are. Let's get a poll here. I think this will be interesting.
And what I would ask everyone to take off their partisan hat, whatever, whether they wear their red hat or their blue hat, set it aside and say, over the last 25 years, really since 2000. So the second George Bush, they both have overspent. It used to be like Republicans were fiscally conservative, so they wanted to balance the budget. They wanted to cut back spending. The only difference over the last 25 years has been what they want to spend the money we don't have on. And again, I will go back to it. Depending on which of those hats you wear, you'll look at the spending and you go, that's a good thing. We should spend money on that. But we're at a point where we can't, without going too far down the rabbit hole, you have the whole entitlement stuff, Social Security, things that cannot go away. We can barely afford that. The national defense, like non-discretionary spending is already out of control. So we can't just keep adding in all these wonderful little discretionary things that we want to do. You get people that are upset about Doge, and you're like, okay, who do we put in charge then of cutting back spending? Because we spend a lot of money on things we can't afford, luxuries, and they're all good things. So hard choices have to be made. And this whole the whole paradox of taking puppies hostage is what it is. Which of these puppies do you want us to kill? Well, I don't want you to kill all of them, but we can't keep all of them alive either.
Well, let's talk about something that will have an impact, Josh. We're going to talk about the first time home buyer down payment help, which is always kind of part of this budget. But more importantly, let's talk about HUD. What impact does funding for HUD at the moment, right? There's a portion of the budget that goes towards housing and urban development, right? Which oversees the FHA program, oversees Section 8 and some other programs out there in the United States as well. And some first-time home buyers benefit from this sort of thing. So cutting the budget there, negative impact, positive impact, what are we talking about?
Well, again, it's not fun cutting anything from your budget. If your household is spending too much money and you go, what are we going to cut? Well, we spent this money because we thought we wanted it and thought it was a good thing. So Section 8 is absolutely getting cut in this budget. The exact numbers I don't have here in front of me, but Section 8 and cuts to HUD. I don't think HUD is a big, inefficient bureaucracy. They don't underwrite. So they administer the FHA loan program, but they're not making underwriting decisions. They're not funding the loans. I don't anticipate this having any problem for borrowers needing FHA funding, but we'll see. Obviously, we'll see where it shakes out. Now, if you're a renter who's getting subsidized housing, a voucher through Section 8, this can be problematic. So for that, do I think it will have an impact? Yes. For our audience, for those of you who are trying to become homeowners, it's unlikely that you have a Section 8 voucher.
Well, I also think Josh, it has an impact on investors that own Section 8 housing. If you're a landlord out there right now counting on Section 8 housing, and you've been keeping up with market rents because the government's been adding more and more to that voucher every single year, this has an impact. Which, does it cause some investors to have to sell property that no longer makes sense? I mean, maybe in some of these areas, but that's something that isn't thought about quite often. I mean, we're talking to a lot of first-time home buyers here, but we're also talking to some people that own other property.
Yeah, no, we have a listener to the show that we did 3 or 4 refinances for when things were ultra low during COVID. And they said Section 8 is our preference for who we rent to, because the government pays some or all of the rent. And those tenants, if they don't act right, if they don't pay their portion, if they damage the property, they're going to get kicked out of the program. So these people behave better than any other tenant. So for a lot of landlords, it is their business plan is to cater to that subsection of the renter market. So it would be foolish to think that it won't have some impact. I don't think it's going to have a widespread impact, but things like this are sort of the unintended consequences. You make a change that you think is a good thing, and then it has downstream consequences that we're only going to see once it goes into play.
And that's going to put us right into talking about first-time home buyer grants, down payment help, that sort of thing, Josh. This is always something that's talked about typically on the campaign trail. Hey, we're going to help first-time home buyers. We're going to issue these grants. We're going to do all of this sort of thing. And what we've said over the last couple of years is, okay, you add more fuel to the fire by doing that, right? You're already in a tight housing market. Things are crazy. Now you're going to give people help that probably would have been buyers either way. Now you're just going to kind of fuel it along. That's going to drive prices up. It's going to drive demand up, all of these things. Since then, housing market's slowed down a little bit. We got more inventory, a little less buyer demand. Interest rates are higher. So down payment assistance help at the moment, probably not the same consequences that we would have seen 2 to 3 years ago when people were originally talking about the same sort of thing. So what are we talking about here? What's actually on paper? And then what's the likelihood of something like this actually getting through?
This is the typical government response. It is very easy. So you guys probably get tired of hearing us talk about supply and demand. True base level, day one, Econ 101. We have far more of a supply problem than we have a demand problem. So demand has weakened largely due to affordability. Affordability is low because of limited supply and high interest rates. But when we look at this and say, hey, let's give $10 billion out to first-time buyers, you just like you said, fuel on the fire. You are increasing demand in a market that's already supply constrained. Artificially.
To some degree, yeah.
Artificially. And every time the government intervenes in any way like this and doesn't allow it to be a free market, and some people will go so far as to say Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, those are artificial interventions. If they had made there be free market financing, home prices would be lower because it would have cost more to finance them. But then going back through COVID, we've talked about this a million times. Was the appropriate response for 60 days, 90 days, 180 days to help drive interest rates lower? There were very good policy reasons to do what they did, but they did it for 24 months, way after there was a problem, way after the problem had been solved and we were out of the tunnel, much less seeing light at the end of the tunnel. So government intervention in general is a bad thing. We just talked about spending money that we do not have. So this is $10 billion that would go to first-time homebuyers, which is a ton of money. In the grand scheme of the federal budget, it's a tiny bit. So it's easy to just kind of ignore it because it's tiny relative to the scope of the budget. And then the scope of who it can help is so limited then that also you get the haves and the have-nots. Who gets it? What they've been talking about is being first-generation homebuyers. Well, I don't know. I've got friends whose parents didn't do a great job raising them. They don't have anything to do with their parents or talk to them. And the thought is that, hey, if your parents did well and they owned their home, then they'll help you get into a home. You don't need government help, which there's probably a lot of truth to that. But I also know situations where parents, didn't help one way or the other. So it's just an interesting place to draw the line. And that's when you get government intervention. The line has to be drawn somewhere. So you're picking winners and losers, which we shouldn't be doing. This, in a perfect world, would all be free market decisions, but we've been manipulating the market for so long that it's impossible to get back to full free market solutions.
So right now, market feels chaotic, Josh. What should first-time homebuyers be doing in this environment? Worrying about the budget or focusing on themselves and what they can control?
Hey, on a macro level, at some point, we all have to start holding our politicians accountable and not just screaming at the other side's politicians. Say, hey, you know what? The people on my side are doing the same thing. They're spending the money on different things, but they're doing the same thing. But that's not going to help you as a home buyer trying to get into the market. But I think everyone needs to put their partisan hats down and go, hey, both parties need to figure out we can't have everything and try to get this budget in line at some point moving forward. I don't think that anything right now, the die is cast for right now, right? The election results from last fall are what they are. This budget is going to make it through. There will be some amendments and some changes and tweaks before it gets through the Senate, but it is what it is. So if you are a renter, prospective homebuyer wanting to get in the market, be aware of it, know how it impacts you, go through with your advisor, with your realtor. How am I going to be impacted, if at all, by these state and local tax limits and those changing and increasing? What does this look like at a higher interest rate? Can I afford? Largely, it always comes back to buy when it's the right time in your life, when you can afford it, when you can take the long view. And by every stretch of the imagination, affordability is in a bad place where people do not want it to be. And some will tell you, yeah, homes are unaffordable. Don't buy it. Wait till they get more affordable. Well, the supposition there is that at some point they get more affordable. And we've gone through for a million reasons why there is unlikely to be a massive correction in home prices. So we have to watch. Maybe you get a little bit of a correction, you get a little bit of increase in wages, you get a little bit of improvement in interest rates. But most likely what we're going to see is sort of a muddle through going forward, where we kind of work through this low affordability by letting rates moderate, home prices stagnate for a while, especially in real terms, inflation adjusted terms, and see how that plays. But that doesn't change your life. If you're 32 and you just had your second kid, it's their time in your life to buy a house. Nothing going on here in the budget, in interest rates, any of that stuff changes where you are on the decisions that you need to.
Yeah, and it's never too early to start the process. So if Josh and I could be of assistance to you, use that link in the description of the video to book a strategy call with Josh to talk about the pre-approval process. If you need a real estate agent locally here in Orange County or anywhere across the country, that same link will get you in touch with us. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit a thumbs up if you found any value in this video. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on everything mortgage and real estate related. But until next time, make sure you buy right, you borrow smart, and you build wealth. Adios.
Amigos.